Welcome to the Outthinker podcast. Each week, we talk with forward-looking strategists and innovators that are challenging the status quo, leading the future of business, and shaping our world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network. This episode is part of a special sub-series we embarked on as a special Outthinker research project for 2022. As business models adapt and change, business ecosystems, think technology partnerships, airline alliances, among other examples, are becoming increasingly critical to developing a competitive advantage. Co-opetition is overtaking competition, where players in an ecosystem compete together as allies against other ecosystems. We hope you enjoy learning about these powerful partnerships and how you can apply these practices to your own business. So welcome. We are thrilled to have Tiffani Bova here with us to talk about ecosystem-based competition. She's the chief growth evangelist at Salesforce. She's the author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Growth IQ, Get Smarter About the Choices That Will Make or Break Your Business. She's been a long time thinking about ecosystem-based competition, and she's witnessed from the inside of Salesforce.com how they have done that. So we're thrilled to have her in this series. She's also ranked by Thinkers 50 as one of the top management thinkers in the world. You can find her on Bloomberg, Cheddar, MSNBC, Yahoo Finance, among others. She's contributed to publications like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Entrepreneur, Quora, Thrive, and others. She's also the host of her own podcast, What's Next with Tiffani Bova. It's an iTunes all-time business and management bestseller and a top sales podcast, according to Top Sales Magazine, with guests like Arianna Huffington and Dan Pink. So, Tiffani, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Oh, there's no place I'd rather be. I'm excited about the conversation.
Excellent. So the thesis here is that we have been emerging into an era where ecosystem-based competition is more important than before. Ecosystem competition has been around forever, right? But now it is becoming the central theme, if you will. And I know that you've written chapters in your book about it. You've been thinking about it. You've been doing it. So first, I'd just like to ask, what do you think of that thesis? Is that true?
I'm going to answer that two ways. One, I'm going to say it was very early in my career, like 1997, and I was selling software. I was the only sales rep. It was a small little software company focused on the legal industry in Los Angeles, California. And I had to call 100 people a day. Hopefully 10 people, would answer, 3 people would set a meeting, and I might sell 1 or 2 of the 100. I couldn't scale that. And I was reading Law Technology Product News. It was a magazine at the time. And there was a full page ad from something called a value-added reseller. And I'm like, what is that? And when I did a little investigating, I realized that this particular VAR, as they're called, would resell technology that was focused on the legal industry. And I'm like, well, this is a no-brainer. Like, do I sit here all day and call the 100 people and hope 10 call me back? Or do I do something with this particular company to have them represent our software to more customers than I could ever reach on my own? And that was kind of the door opener for me on the power of selling with and through partners and leveraging what has now become sort of the ecosystem and alliance conversation. But that scale that I could get in selling that way was core to my career for 15 years. I actually became a channel chief across 5 or 6 different technology companies in creating these ecosystems by which we could scale into particular industries and verticals like public sector or finance or hospitality or even healthcare. I've always been bullish on the power of those ecosystems. And when the cloud came along, end of 99, 2000, I once again was faced with an opportunity to be one of the first to create these kinds of programs that worked with and through these cloud-based partners. I can tell you that Salesforce was a whisper of what it is now, right? It's 23-year-old now. And back then it was, what is the partner? Who is the partner? How do we use them? Where in other industries outside of technology, I always use this example. You can't go to Heinz.com and buy ketchup. I always pick on Heinz. I don't know why, but I do. And like when my friends and family would be like, what do you do? And I go, well, you can't go to Heinz.com and buy ketchup. You have to buy it from the grocery store. I help companies like Heinz in the technology space get their products into the shelves of CompUSA or Best Buy or through these value-added resellers. And so ecosystems in the supply chain have been the MO for so many industries for so long. Cars. I mean, you have to go to a dealer. Now, some car companies are catching on to what Tesla has done, but that direct to consumer kind of company bypassed those ecosystems, if you will. Some of them were able to do really good early on, but now you've seen them shift and they're also in retailers. So now they've had to expand that. The reason I wanted to set that context is the conversation of ecosystem has been around forever. It's now just taking on a different life because of, I would say, mobile, cloud, social, big data, and all the things that have really transformed business.
It does feel to me, though, that a grocery store that's selling Heinz ketchup, they are adding value, I guess, right? Because they're stocking, they are getting customers in the door, they are shelving, they're checking out, they're collecting. So those are all kind of value add. But the nature of that kind of relationship feels different to me than what I imagine the nature of relationship you developed with your VARs.
Look, shelf space in a grocery store is highly competitive.
Yes.
How much? How often? End caps? Are you at eye level? Are you at floor level? Are you at can't reach it level? Like those are highly sought after space. And so, it's similar. If you walk into a Best Buy today, it's the same thing. Where is the shelf space? Do you have an end cap? Do you have your own store within a store? Those kinds of partnerships and what kind of relationship that is had. But you nailed it. It's about what is that value add? Is it marketing development funds? Is it co-op dollars? Is it co-selling and cross-selling? Is it maintenance and warranty support? A company couldn't possibly do all of the support on their own. They need to bring in third parties that can service air conditioners or cars or whatever it might be. That is a day-to-day example. You may not, as a consumer, understand that that is all part of an ecosystem and supply chain that has a long tail effect on a company's ability to be able to reach, service, and maintain relationships with customers.
Yeah. And I guess then the shelf space that you get, whether you get end caps or not, has to do with what you pay, but it also has to do with the bargaining power, which I guess has to also do with the attractiveness of your product relative to the reach of the retailer. So there's kind of this bargaining power between the partners.
Yeah. And it was a force function. So think about those direct to consumer brands. They might not have been able to break into a retailer. They might have said, unless you're going to do $1 million a month, I'm making up that number, but as an example, $1 million a month with us, we're not able to give you shelf space. It's just too competitive, but we'll give it to you online. And they're like, well, if I'm just going to go online, I'll go online by myself and I'll try to establish a relationship with the customer directly. And so some of that was also because of the complexity of that sell with and sell through business that has been established for decades and had not modernized itself to the fact that the web had really changed the way in which companies can reach and service and connect with customers. It didn't have to be brick and mortar. And I think that forced those that maybe were brick and mortar to start to embrace online in a different way. And even opening up ecosystems to brands they wouldn't have in their retailer, they gave them availability on their online stores and almost tried to prove it out before they let them go, onto the store shelves. So it has really been this interesting shift that kind of 2000, this chasm was crossed around opening up ecosystems to different kinds of partners, as well, the opportunity to reach different kinds of customers in new ways through new channels.
And so that might be the change that even for older companies like Heinz, who have been operating in an ecosystem model, it's because of the digital opportunities that how you engage with the ecosystem might have changed, or has it not changed? Has it been that there have always been ecosystem heavy companies and now just there are more of them?
Well, I mean, even if you just take car dealerships as an example, those aren't owned by the manufacturers. They are independent dealerships that are resellers of those particular cars. You have someone enter the market like a Tesla who says, nope, we're going to go direct to consumer. And oh, by the way, we're going to really minimize the supply chain. You have 3 choices, 3 colors, 3 builds. That's it. It's $500 to register the car. When it shows up, you pay for it. We're done. Yeah. That's very different than I'm going to go spend all day walking through the thousands of cars to choose from with 900 different options packages, and I have to sit down for 2 hours to negotiate the financing, and I have to do all those things. There was a better way. And so now you see car companies really doing these blend of 2 things. With the supply chain challenges we're having right now are highlighting the fact that they're having less of an inventory, there's less availability, they're able to charge a premium on cars right now. You can't get one. The used car market has increased its prices. All kinds of impact has happened because that supply chain has been so disrupted. The kinds of partners that you work with in traditional kinds of businesses that are, hard goods is different than those kinds of partners you'd work with in the cloud, like the example of Salesforce that you gave at the beginning. They are different, yet they are so similar in the core value that they bring to a company, but also their expectations of as a partner in working with someone that's a big brand where they add so much value. I think the expectations are fairly similar.
So then let's try to take a contrast between a non-ecosystem company to an ecosystem. So what I'm trying to get at is, what do you see as new or different things, whether those things are sources of competitive advantage or key success factors or mindsets that a company for whom an ecosystem is becoming more important, something that they need to add to their strategic toolkit. For example, I'm going to be giving a speech later today for people in the steel industry, and they've got a dedicated workforce. They take in raw materials. You could call that ecosystem. It's really a supplier, I would say. They add value to it, and then they sell these rods or these plates to other manufacturers through a direct sales force. Not a whole lot of ecosystem characteristics. So if you took that and compared it to a Salesforce or a software company or a Tesla, what are the differences in competitive advantage or key success factors?
I'd say they are part of an ecosystem, an OEM in the technology space, that original equipment manufacturer, the person who delivers them the raw steel. They are one of the suppliers that is taking that and manufacturing it and then selling it out. So they are part of an ecosystem. Now, they may sell directly to end users, but there may be a small percentage, I don't know, because I don't know their business, that may actually take those goods and resell it maybe to developers or architects or, state government or whatever it might be. So they are definitely part of an ecosystem. They just may play a piece. Something comes from someone, they do something to it, and it keeps going. But it is all part of that original steel manufacturer making its way through. And if you think about coffee beans as an example, coffee beans might cost 5 cents for a bag of coffee beans. So that's starting way at the beginning of the supply chain. It then makes it to, I just want a cup of coffee. And if I went to a restaurant, that cup of coffee might be $1.50. Okay. Now it's gone from 5 cents to $1.50. Now, somewhere along the line, right? It went from the grower, had to get to the restaurant. So it went to a distributor, and then it went to the supermarket, and then somebody bought it for the restaurant or distributor, and then they made the coffee and it's $1.50. So everyone's making a little money along the way. Or you go to a Starbucks and it's $5, but yet it was 5 cents for the coffee. So the value that gets added along the way also has tremendous impact on how much you're able to charge. So as someone in the ecosystem, you have to decide, am I going to be at the 5 cent business, $1.50 business, or the $5 business? In the steel example, you might be making pennies on the dollar because you're just selling raw goods that then gets made and they take it to make it the cup of coffee. But someone then makes it into a beautiful office. That's sort of the Starbucks latte, right? That's the kind of example there. But I'd say to your original question, partner to partner collaboration has really gotten very interesting. So partners in the ecosystem working together to solve problems together. And they may not be competitors necessarily. It could be like, look, I make a coffee machine. Okay, well, I make the filters, but let's work together. So we could maybe bundle our solutions. So when we sell it out, there's more value and we have a competitive advantage versus someone who is selling it separately, requiring the customer to go to multiple places. And so partners working together when they can solve those kinds of problems has tremendous value in the supply chain. So I've really been excited to see P2P working more effectively when they're not competitors. But what's been amazing to see is over the last 2 years, you see this kind of co-opetition where competing companies are working together to solve much bigger problems. And I think the vaccine is a great example of globally, right? Pharmaceutical companies in many ways working together to very quickly put together what could be tested and rolled out to solve a global crisis, because it wasn't one country, one part of the world was feeling this situation. Everybody was feeling it simultaneously. And so when you see that cooperative partnership in the supply chain, in ecosystems, that I think has a tremendous chance to change a lot of the ways in which products and services are delivered to the ultimate either consumer or the business they're servicing. And so those are two things I'm really paying attention to, right? That P2P at the classic level where we're going to get together because we can create a greater solution for ultimate customers. But then the other on that is actually working with someone you may view as a little bit of a competitor, but in the customer's eyes, if we could get together, it would be much better for them.
I love that. Yeah, that's a real change, right? Because in the older model, you're fitting into an ecosystem and you're already going from A to B. I know that I need to buy beans and I need to grind them to these crazy specifications. But if you can cooperate with the filter maker and the coffee maker, then you might be able to put together an offer that is a leap different than what customers are experiencing. It allows for greater degrees of innovation.
Yeah. And even if you think we stay on coffee, you could say, okay, Nespresso has a machine, they have their own pods, but Starbucks has said, well, we want to make pods for Nespresso machines because we want our coffee in there too, even though someone brewing coffee at their home takes them away from coming into the store and spending $5. If you're a leader listening to this and you go, yeah, but I don't want to cannibalize my own business in that example of, nope, I want them to come into the store, or nope, I'm going to make pods for somebody who is going to make coffee at home. You almost want both. And so maybe I don't go into Starbucks as much as I would normally in my hometown. I do much more when I'm traveling because I have an espresso machine at home and I'll mix and match coffees as an example, right? And so leaders sometimes get distracted by shiny things like, oh, this partnership is going to accelerate our growth. It's really going to put us on that hockey stick. That's one. Yes. Or the other is, no, why would I ever push business through an ecosystem when it actually cuts into my profitability and I lose control over that relationship with the customer? I'd rather just sell it all direct and own every piece of that supply and go to market model. And I don't want to partner with everybody.
Sure. Yeah. Which brings us back to that co-opetition mindset. It does also seem that companies like Salesforce, and I'm sure others that you've seen, they build the ecosystem around them. I think that's sort of different, right? Like Kraft probably plugged into an ecosystem and influenced it. It's been around for, 100 years or whatever. But, Salesforce had to build developers, and Amazon Alexa's business had to have things plug into the networks. You have to build the ecosystem and get people to decide to even engage with the ecosystem. And not players that are already there, but new players. Get a developer to build an app for your platform. That seems like the next level, no?
Interestingly enough, I have two stories that sort of land right on top of that, right? One is in my previous role prior to joining Salesforce, I was a research fellow at Gartner, which is the world's largest IT analyst and consulting firm. And one of my customers, one of my clients, one of our clients at the time was Amazon AWS, actually. And they had no direct selling force and they had no partner ecosystem at the time. Just selling directly to end users because of the demand of sort of, I want to have some compute power that's not in my data center. They got to about $1 billion without really a selling engine behind them. It was just technology engineers, IT people using their own credit card and saying, I need $10,000 worth of compute for a burst because I'm doing an ad on the Super Bowl. I'm going to spend $1 million for a compute burst for the ad during the Super Bowl, whatever it might be. But I went in and worked with that team on actually standing up what was going to be that indirect channel program. What was that going to look like to start to recruit developers? So ISVs, independent software vendors, cloud service providers, others that would do consulting, maybe even doing custom dev work, on actually making now an on-premise solution connect to AWS. And that had to happen in a secure way. Some clients wanted to actually lift and shift, right? They wanted to move their data center completely to the cloud, which needed this ecosystem. And so they were simultaneously hiring direct selling efforts to sell out to the market, but they had to stand up an indirect channel program to attract these partners. The thing that worked in their favor was they already had about $1 billion worth of revenue. So they'd proven the model. So partners were kind of coming at them. They just didn't have a way to scale it. And by the way, their biggest competitor in Seattle as well has about 600,000 partners in their channel program. And there was probably about, 100,000 at the time. I'm really dating this. This is, a decade ago, of how many partners were actually even potentially going to be active in doing this. So if you were going to compete against such a big competitor that had such a large ecosystem, you better stand one up quick. And I think because they were a digital cloud first company, they attracted a lot of those born in the cloud partners a lot faster. Salesforce was in the same position. Right? It was a born in the cloud company. They were able to attract those developers and consultants on how could people implement software as a service into a business that is traditionally on premise. What does that look like? And very early on, Salesforce knew that they needed to leverage those partners. Now, a different mindset though. It isn't a resale relationship. It is really an influence consulting integration relationship. So some ecosystems are about resale, others are about influence, some have both. But that kind of situation in making those decisions about what is the best way to approach it has everything to do with who are your customers, how do they like to buy, what role would a third party play in that kind of sales motion, implementation motion, support motion. And some of you may be like, look, we're not in tech. We don't have that kind of thing, right? They buy from us one time. We may not see them again. But all you have to understand is who is the customer? How do they like to buy? Where do they like to buy? And what kind of value could potentially be wrapped around that? Am I going to do it myself? Am I going to hire for it? Am I going to partner for it? Am I going to connect with in a co-opetition way? Or am I going to connect in another ecosystem? There's all kinds of options. But I think, look, I said it really quickly, but many people get hung up on I will lose control. I will lose profit if I work with third parties. And while I understand the argument, the scale win you get from it, if you start from what customers actually want and need from you, the answer would never be, it's always direct. And if I'm picking tech one more time, Dell was known for Direct by Dell. Michael Dell wrote a book called Direct by Dell. And it was only 2009-ish that he made the decision they wanted to go through third-party channels because their competitors, HP, IBM at the time, Lenovo, and others had the strong ecosystem. Don't hold me to this number because I'm not paying quite as much attention as I did when I was at Gartner. But I think at this point, even with the acquisitions of VMware and EMC and others, they're at like 40% of their total revenue is through partners.
Wow.
So make that decision, turn that corner. So it used to be direct. We want to own the relationship. We want to hold the profitability, right? We want all that value. But the customer said, hold on a second. We actually need things you can't give us. And if you're going to get to 10 billion and 20 billion and 30 billion and 50 billion, whatever it is, you're going to need partners. 40% of revenue of a company like that is no small number. So I would say just look to industries where, those kinds, or Ford, 100% is through partners. Cisco, 95% is through partners. And so you really have to think, what is the value?
I hate to ask you to repeat, but you listed a list of options. I was wondering if you just came up with that off the top of your head, or if that's some kind of list that you have. You said, do I want a reseller? Do I want to go direct? Do I want to partner? Do I want to plug into a different ecosystem?
Yeah, a list right here. I have been in and around this space right since 1996. It's been almost 30 years. But I would say this, and I talk about it in the book, Growth IQ. I literally would start like this. If you're listening to this and you are contemplating whether an ecosystem partners is a way for you to grow and scale and or even service your customers in a different way, start with the customer. What do they want? How do they want to buy? What can you deliver today? You can't be everywhere. And unless you have endless ability to spend money, you can't try everything. You have to then say, what are we capable of doing ourselves? What can't we do ourselves? What we can't do, can we fill in those gaps using these kinds of ecosystems and alliances? Now, you may say, well, there isn't one already out there. We're going to have to do it on our own. Isn't that expensive? Isn't there a lot of risk? And I said it pretty quickly. Like many executives will go, if we do this one deal with this one big partner, it's going to change the game for us. And you're giving way too much credit because you might be one of many things they sell. But you have to lean into it and try with a handful of partners, learn from it, but having structure around that kind of program and understanding where, how, and why you would use partners versus go direct or co-sell or co-service or co-develop or co-deliver. There are all kinds of options, but you can't do it all. So if you start with your customers and you look at the highest sort of percentage that are looking to do things a certain way from you, then that's where I'd begin. But I would not tell you today that 100% direct is the best way to go.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think that's a great distinction between a deal and a program. That's a different mindset as well. So I want to shift a little bit and look at the organization as an ecosystem. Salesforce, from my understanding from the outside, has a very unique culture, organizational model, incentive structures, that kind of thing that make it more agile, right? So I would imagine like working at Salesforce, I have more freedom than working at McDonald's, let's say. But there are companies that are adapting more agile models, and they're starting to look almost like ecosystems within the walls. Have you looked at that or thought about that?
Salesforce has invested a ton in an ecosystem that we call the App Exchange, which is applications that are built in and around the Salesforce technology by independent software vendors. We've got thousands of them now online, and I think we just hit our millionth download. So it's significant impact. And in parts of the world, we rely on partners heavily, right, to even help us sell. But for sure, in implementation and consulting and customization and integration on-prem with potentially other applications that need to have access to Salesforce information or vice versa, those partners are critical to our success. And look, customer success is one of our core tenets. If our customers are not successful, we're not successful, right? I mean, if they have 50 licenses, 500 licenses, 5,000 licenses, and they're growing and they need more licenses, good for us. If they're not growing and they need less licenses, bad for us. And so being able to support that is one thing. But we also have an ecosystem called Trailblazers, which is really based on a platform we have called Trailhead, which is online learning, can give certification for free to anybody. You don't have to be a Salesforce customer. So someone working at McDonald's who says, I want to get into technology, I'm going to get a certification through Trailhead. We call them our Trailblazers. And our Trailblazer community is an ecosystem that has a life of itself. They create chapters on their own. They get together on their own. They support each other on their own. We recognize those that are really doing amazing things out in the market, those vehicles to give back. So I'd say that that's also a view on kind of an ecosystem, right, of people who are in the Salesforce family, but might not work for us. And we need millions of them because we have so many customers that require internal capabilities. We have to make sure that those people have the opportunity to learn how to do things, whether you're an administrator or a seller, right? You're using the technology, whatever it might be. So you have to think of those ecosystems as value add, like we do for Trailhead and all of our Trailblazers, or the App Exchange, which is really about giving those kind of vertical capabilities or integration points or even custom development for something using the Salesforce platforms across our multiple clouds or even on Heroku. And now we have Tableau and we have Slack. There's so many other things that you really can do. But I think the message here is we knew what we were willing to do and capable of doing. Then we knew what we weren't. And you need to make those investments. And it is absolutely part of who we are because we're so hyper-focused on customer success. If we weren't so hyper-focused on customer success, you'd be like, you have an ecosystem, you don't have an ecosystem, like what's the difference? But if our customers aren't successful, we are not successful. So it was absolutely part of who we are.
Interesting. I wonder if we find out that that is a prerequisite for being able to really build out indirect revenue through ecosystems, is to be hyper-focused on customer success or customer-centric.
Well, that's what I said, right? If you're going to try to make this decision, start with the customer. And then work back on who are they? How do they like to buy? Where do they like to buy? Are you able to deliver in all those channels? Probably not. And then if you have the requirement of implementation and support and all of those kinds of things, you're an air conditioning manufacturer. Can you go and install at everyone's house across the country? Can you service them all? Can you replace them all? I'm going to guess your answer is probably no. So how are you going to get people trained on your air conditioner product, on how to repair it? You want to be a certified repair person. I'm going to date myself, but do you remember the commercials on the Whirlpool repairman, right? Not all of them worked for Whirlpool, but they were certified to represent Whirlpool out in the field. They might have worked for Sears. They might have worked for JCPenney. They might have worked independently. The point is that you see them as a Whirlpool repairman. Think about Trailblazers, right? Think about Trailhead. You have to certify and train them, keep them up to date on what that is. So even if it's just training ecosystem and making sure they know how to use, deploy, support what your products and services are, I mean, that's why that customer success is such a critical part to making the right decision for your company, wherever you are in your growth journey.
Yes, that's interesting. I'm almost imagining that there are these different concentric circles of control, or, that you have employees, then you'll have these very close partners of your ecosystem who are well trained and go to the client with your brand. And then you're going to have like your suppliers and B2B partners that are collaborating with you. And then you'll probably have what does Michael Porter call them? The complementary products that maybe you have no contractual or organization with, but consumers use them, your buyers use them with their products with yours.
And you can even, if you have a beachhead product, so I'm just going to pick on Heinz again, you might say, well, what's the ecosystem play on Heinz? Chefs, people who cook at home. I buy Heinz. If I go to Heinz.com, maybe I can get recipes on how to make barbecue sauce with Heinz. People can post stuff. Now you've got this vibrant, customer-driven ecosystem of like-minded people who like to cook and come up with creative recipes for Heinz. I'm stretching here off the top of my head, but I think you get the idea, right? It doesn't have to be complex. It could just be like-minded. I was flying back from San Francisco to LA when I was writing Growth IQ, and I sat next to this gentleman who owned a a textile business. And I actually used him as an example in front of my customer base penetration chapter. He had 100,000 customers. He sold textiles, like he just sold fabric, but he didn't know those customers. And I'm like, what a miss. So I started sharing with him, like, what if you started sharing patterns and you had people share the patterns they've used or what they did with a particular fabric you had or how they did certain things. He was looking at me like, I never would have thought of that. Instead, it was, like, I'm just going to sell this person fabric and whatever they do with it is fine. And they may never buy from me again. I'm like, what a shame, right? Instead of maybe you create sewing clubs or you do things where you get like-minded people together. So ecosystems, if you think about it that way, I think everybody can have some idea with their particular business on how they might be able to either get like-minded people together, help them get scale, help them provide better service and coverage to customers, and maybe even work with other partners to create that kind of solution or kind of product that's already pre-integrated that people may want. If you keep the customer front and center, you're always going to be open to these kinds of ideas. But if it's like, we don't do it this way, we're going to give up profit and control, that lack of a fixed mindset, you've got no business having this conversation if you're not doing it now, because you're going to need a beginner's mind, a growth mindset to be willing to try these kinds of things.
Wow. Yeah, I love it. This has been fascinating for me, and I'm sure for our viewers and listeners. You have introduced some really important distinctions that is at least got my mind spinning, and yet also given us some very clear first steps about focus on what your customer needs. Can you deliver it all? And then how do I want to engage with those that would deliver those elements of value for me?
One more thing just on that customer is don't make the mistake that you think you know what your customers want. Surveying them once a year, having a casual conversation is going to land you in a situation where you've lost touch with those customers. So you have to go on a listening tour, virtually or in person, and find out what is really going on. Because if you're going to say, I'm going to make decisions based on what we just talked about on information I gathered before the pandemic, you're definitely going to get yourself in trouble. A year ago, probably still going to get yourself in trouble. Even 90 days ago, now the world is, depending on where you're listening to this, is starting to open back up. That may have implications as well, but we're still in a supply chain crisis. So we have to find ways where you can carve out an hour a day where you just talk to customers. And great. I will tell you, when the pandemic first hit, our co-CEO, Mark Benioff, the co-founder of Salesforce, he gave us a challenge of having 1 million conversations with customers, not 1 million demos, not 1 million RFP responses, but conversations so we could understand the jobs to be done. That completely reshaped what we were doing over the last 18 months. Now that we're coming out the other side of it, we can regroup one more time, but we ended up doing over 6.5 million conversations. And now it's embedded in everything we do. So that's the kind of habits you have to build in order to keep up with what your customers expect from you.
That makes a ton of sense. Great. Well, thank you so much, Tiffani. And it has been a flow of insights and ideas. And, I can tell you've been thinking about this for a long time and living it. So you're in a very special position of both being a thought leader and a practitioner. And thank you for being here with us.
Again, thank you for having me. And I love the conversation. I love talking about partners and ecosystems. So thanks for asking.
Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our producers, Karina Reyes and Zach Ness, our editor, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kai-Han Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week with another episode of Outthinkers.